Hello everyone, and welcome. I want to talk to you about a moment that you probably can't shake. A meeting that felt less like an accident and more like a cosmic appointment you had no memory of making. Forget the idea of chance for a minute, because that word doesn't belong here. What happened was never a roll of the dice. It was the precise movement of a divine hand. Something inside of you, a deep, silent, magnetic current, didn't just suggest you go where you went, it compelled you. This wasn't driven by thought or logic, but by a powerful, instinctual pull toward a soul who was suffering in absolute quiet. They weren't making a scene, but their inner light was dangerously low, a tiny, almost extinguished ember. This person didn't lift their voice to ask for help. They didn't wave a white flag in public, but their silent distress reached the highest place. Heaven heard the unvoiced cry of their spirit. And while every other person in that setting walked right past, caught up in their own rush, you stopped. Your logical mind might have been shouting, "Keep going, this isn't your business," but your deeper spirit, your soul, had already recognized a sacred, urgent signal. You saw through the perfect, functional exterior they wore, recognizing the presence of a silent, desperate call buried beneath their mask. There were no fireworks or dramatic signals in the sky. You didn't receive a message in a dream. Yet, with a profound certainty that defies explanation, you knew you had to pause. You hadn't scheduled this intervention, you certainly didn't volunteer for the responsibility, but your soul had already signed the consent form. This is because, my friends, you are a chosen one, and you were deployed. You were sent, not randomly, but dropped into a moment of perfect divine timing. Your purpose was not to deliver a lecture or attempt a clumsy fix, but simply to be a witness, a carrier of a mission only you were capable of fulfilling. This assignment, given to you in silence, asked you to pour pure, sustaining light into a vessel that had entirely forgotten its own holiness. Your task was to rescue a silent, fallen angel, and to do so without any expectation of recognition, applause, or earthly glory. It was about purpose, pure and simple. This whole connection, this moment that still replays in your mind, is not just a coincidence, it's a profound confirmation. If you feel a sudden, quiet fire, an unexplainable knowing, waking up in your chest right now, then you already understand this truth. If that confirmation resonates deep within you, let the universe know. Comment 99 below. Don't do it for me, but let it serve as a spiritual signal to the heavens that you have received this message and that your spirit is acknowledging the truth. If you agree with what you've heard, please hit the like button to confirm your alignment. And if you know, deep in your gut, that your greater journey is only just beginning, go ahead and subscribe, because the next chapter of your life, the one that's currently unfolding, was written and sealed long before your feet ever touched the ground here. The person you met was more than just a casual acquaintance or a friend or even a romantic partner, or simply a brief intersection of paths. Absolutely not. They were a divine link, positioned on your specific journey with what felt like surgical precision by forces you couldn't see, but have always vaguely sensed. You didn't just meet them in the ordinary sense of the word. Your soul was intentionally dispatched to them, and the instructions for this sacred assignment, they weren't delivered via mail or an official email. There was no literal angel standing at your door, handing you a formal scroll that read, "This soul is sacred. You are now designated as their protector." But deep within the silence of your intuition, you felt a strong, undeniable knowing. You sensed that there was something profoundly significant, something holy yet deeply scarred, residing within them. It was a voice that once sang with the clarity of heaven, but was now reduced to mere, fragile whispers and long stretches of silence. And yet you heard them, even in the moments when they were completely silent, when they tried to portray perfect strength. You felt the weight of their inner battles. You sensed the heavy shadows they were wrestling with. They smiled politely, they performed their role, but you saw the cracks in the facade. While everyone else accepted the mask they were wearing as reality, you, the one who was sent, read the truth of their soul. This was so much more than simple empathy or surface-level kindness. This was an alignment. You weren't just being a nice person. You were on an active, unseen assignment. And here is the profound secret that very few people will ever truly grasp. Your spirit willingly signed the contract for this connection long before your physical birth. Before you drew your very first breath, this entire connection, this particular mission, and this specific soul were carefully scripted into the blueprint of your destiny. That, my dear listener, is why you were utterly incapable of looking away. That is why walking out the door and moving on felt profoundly wrong, even when every logical part of your mind was begging for peace and distance. This was never meant to be a matter of logic or convenience. This was a moment of absolute divine orchestration, a call directly from heaven, carefully hidden within the clothing of your natural human compassion. They didn't explicitly ask you for saving, they didn't collapse in a public plea for help, yet their silence pierced the veil and reached the ears of the Almighty, and you were the living, breathing response. You arrived not with a booming voice or a fiery sermon, but with the quiet, potent power of your presence. Because sometimes the divine doesn't send a grand preacher. It sends a presence, a heart, a simple light. You didn't fix them in the way people assume. Instead, you became their anchor. You didn't forcibly change who they were, but you served as a constant, gentle reminder of their true identity, who they were then and who they still are now beneath the wreckage. You sacredly held the space for a light that everyone else dismissed as a problem, and you guarded a precious, delicate flame that had nearly been extinguished forever. And now, the mystery deepens even further. Why did you feel that sudden, magnetic urgency for a person you barely knew? Why did your soul instinctively leap forward even while your conscious mind was saying, just let it go? Why did this soul appear in your life at that precise volatile moment when your own world might have been shaking? Because the mission was never just about them. It was profoundly about you as well. The divine assignment wasn't merely a rescue operation for another. It was an activation for your own spirit. Heaven knew that if you were capable of seeing the divine spark in a fallen angel, you would inevitably be forced to remember the divine spark residing within yourself. It was designed as a mutual ignition, one soul flickering in the shadows of silence, and another soul carrying a powerful, ready fire. And in the moment of your sacred encounter, the flame of their true self returned. But let's go even deeper with this. What if that single person, that silent, wounded soul you helped to rescue, wasn't the final or only soul assigned to your care? What if that moment was merely the first small ripple in a plan far greater and wider than you can currently imagine? What if you, without conscious knowledge, have been operating in this assignment your entire life? And what if, even as you read this, there is another soul already turning the corner, about to cross your path, waiting right now for your unique light to appear? Stay with me, because the next realization may fundamentally rearrange everything you thought you knew about your past, the nature of your connections, and the ultimate purpose of your life. The signals have always been there, clear and consistent. You simply didn't possess the spiritual lexicon to interpret what you were seeing until this moment. They didn't scream for attention, they didn't dramatically beg, and they certainly didn't collapse in a public spectacle for the world to notice. They simply, quietly faded. They faded into the background of a mundane life, they hid behind perfectly polite, practiced smiles, and they vanished into a seemingly fine existence that was, on the inside, slowly suffocating their spirit. This was not a loud, visible crash. This was a slow, agonizing, silent descent, and because it lacked drama, no one paid attention. But you did, because what everyone else mistook for simple emotional strength, your spirit immediately recognized as sheer survival. And survival, my friend, is not the same thing as peace. It is camouflage. They were never truly okay. They were just invisible in plain sight. This was a soul that was once radiant, but was now profoundly dimmed by the sheer, crushing weight of a world that was never designed to understand their light. You could feel this truth vibrating off of them even before they spoke, before they shared a single word of their story. You felt that subtle ache, that flicker behind their eyes that whispered, "I used to believe in something transcendent. Now, I am just trying to make it through the next hour." This was more profound than simple sadness or depression. This was a divine being, exquisitely crafted, who had been disconnected from their own powerful light. It was a celestial assignment momentarily crushed under the burden of rejection, muted by profound betrayal, and buried beneath societal expectations that were never, ever meant for them. They were simply not built for the constructs of this heavy, loud world. That is precisely why it broke them. They spoke softly, they moved through life with a gentle reserve, and they dreamed wildly in secret. Yet, everything in their environment consistently told them to stop, to dim their shine, to blend in, to completely hide everything that was holy and unique about them. And so, they stopped shining, not because they weren't worthy of their own light, but because no one had ever confirmed that their magnificent spiritual wings were still allowed to be open. Until you came along, you saw it, didn't you? That divine residue shimmering in their energy, that ancient ache that seemed to have no root in their current lifetime, that purity that felt ancient, something otherworldly. This was never just a person. This was an angel who had utterly forgotten their own sacred identity, and heaven deployed you not to perform a repair job, but simply to find them. Because angels don't always fall in a dramatic storm of fire and thunder. Sometimes they fall in silence in a slow, invisible, and consuming agony. And when a soul falls like that, God does not send a celestial army. He sends a witness. He sends a companion. He sends a soul perfectly tuned, exactly like yours. You were the one who noticed what everyone else strategically ignored. You felt the emotional dissonance. You picked up on the subtle, divine signals hidden in their nervous laughter, in their hesitation, and in their deep, unnamed hunger for something they couldn't possibly articulate. They didn't know how to explicitly ask for help, but you didn't need them to, because this was never about language. This was about immediate recognition, spirit to spirit, light to light. Now, here is the startling revelation. What if this angel's profound descent was not an accident at all? What if their falling was an essential part of a much higher design? What if they were meant to fall so that you, the chosen one, could finally remember why you were sent? Because in the powerful act of saving them, you were forced to see a reflection of yourself. You remembered the times you quietly faded, when your own magnificent wings were clipped by the collective weight of the world's expectations. And suddenly, the mission wasn't just a singular act of external saving. It became a story about both of you, two powerful, divine lights meeting not in some fictional state of perfection, but in a necessary, life-changing divine collision. And now, there is something absolutely crucial that heaven wants to reveal to you. Something about the deeper reason this angel was placed in your life at that one exact moment. It's a truth you could never have predicted, but one that will instantly make all your past actions make perfect divine sense. Keep reading, because what you are about to understand next will permanently change the way you perceive every single soul you have ever carried, comforted, or simply paused for. The truth of your design is unfolding right now, and you are standing at the very epicenter of it. They had nearly convinced themselves that the Almighty had simply forgotten their existence, that perhaps they were too fundamentally broken, too spiritually far gone, or too abandoned to ever be remembered again. They mastered the smile in public, they laughed when social situations demanded it, and they expertly played their role, but deep in the recesses of their soul, they were rapidly unraveling, not with a burst of angry defiance, but with a deep, silent, spiritual exhaustion. It was the quiet, dangerous kind that whispers, "Maybe I was never meant to make it to the other side." They weren't angry at God. They were spiritually disconnected, emotionally numb, fighting wars no one could ever see, and secretly agonizing over why heaven had become so profoundly silent. Where was the guidance, the answers, the signs, the clear, guiding purpose they had once felt? They had prayed with fervent intensity once, but nothing shifted, nothing moved. So, slowly, they stopped. They stopped asking, stopped hoping, and stopped believing that anyone was coming to their aid. And that was the precise moment you appeared, not with a dramatic entrance, not with flashing lights, but with a grounded, affirming presence. With a quiet kindness, with the simple, steady glow of your light. You didn't arrive with the goal of performing some impossible miracle. You became the walking, breathing miracle they needed. And the most astonishing part of the whole story is that you didn't even realize the magnitude of what you were doing. You simply spoke a kind word. You just listened without judgment. You simply showed up and remained present. But in doing so, you reignited a divine spark they had long assumed was completely dead. You were not just a passing comfort. You were a confirmation. You were living, tangible proof that the Almighty had never, for 1 second, left their side. Proof that their cry, even though it was utterly silent, had still reached the throne of grace, and your arrival was not a whim of fate. You didn't stumble upon them. You were intentionally sent to them, positioned right at the crucial edge. That dangerous, sacred space situated between total surrender and complete collapse. You arrived at the exact moment when they whispered their last, desperate thought. God, if you still see me, please, just send me one sign. You were that sign. Heaven didn't send a theological discussion. He didn't send a bolt of lightning. He sent you, not to correct their beliefs, not to rescue them with flawlessly eloquent words, but to be the unwavering reminder that someone still sees the undeniable beauty they had buried, that someone still recognizes the holy spark dormant inside them, that someone still cares enough to pause, because when people lose their faith, they don't need to be preached at or judged. They need to be profoundly seen, and that is the sacred work you performed. You didn't attempt to change their being. You simply reminded them of the magnificent truth of who they already were. You saw the flicker of light beneath the spiritual ashes they were covered in. You spoke to the royalty that was perfectly hidden under the emotional rubble, and that shaken them to their core. How could a near stranger look at their visible brokenness and still, without hesitation, call it sacred? How could someone walk directly into their profound darkness and act as if it were still unquestionably holy ground? But that is precisely what happened. Without a conscious realization, you became a spiritual lighthouse for them. Not by shouting through some spiritual megaphone, but simply by standing your ground, glowing steadily and remaining anchored. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than a simple interaction, a passing conversation, a small gesture of kindness, a fleeting moment in time. But on the inside, within the depths of their soul, their entire inner world began a massive, necessary shift. Their heart, hearing your voice, began to whisper, maybe I'm not invisible after all. Maybe God still has his eyes intently fixed on me. Maybe this is not, in fact, the final chapter of my story. And in that one tiny, sacred moment, their faith flickered back to life. It wasn't a roaring fire yet, but it was enough to find the strength to take one more step forward, enough to lift their bowed head, enough to simply breathe again, not just to exist in survival mode, but to finally remember the feeling of being fully alive. And now, here is the profound, haunting question that occupies the silence. What if that single, seemingly small moment saved their entire destiny? What if their story, which was moments away from an abrupt end, is now only beginning its grand narrative, because you obeyed a quiet, internal pull you didn't even intellectually understand? What if the divine didn't just send you to rekindle someone else's faith, but to awaken and confirm your own sacred calling, because something significant is already on its way? The next assignment is coming. A moment that will not only validate every single feeling you've ever had about yourself, but will also clearly expose exactly how many lives, how many futures, are intricately attached to the simple obedience of your heart. You were sent to save one soul, but what if that one was merely the beautiful beginning? Stay with me now, because what you are about to realize next will completely reframe every connection you have ever questioned, and will finally open your eyes to the authentic, strategic reason heaven keeps putting certain specific souls on your path. There is an undeniable quality about you that you have never been able to logically explain. You have always navigated life while feeling everything, not just the sting of your own pain, but the acute pain of others. Not just your personal emotions, but sudden heavy waves of feeling that seem to come from nowhere. Silent storms, invisible weights, and unexplained heaviness. You have carried profound sadness without a personal story to justify it. You have battled grief you didn't earn, and for the longest time you internalized the question, what is profoundly wrong with me? But let me tell you the truth, there was nothing wrong with you at all. There was something profoundly divine about you, because what you labeled as a flaw or a burden was in fact the undeniable evidence of your assignment. You were not created to simply blend into the crowd. You were born to sense, to carry, to heal, and to spiritually intercept. While others could walk through the world relatively untouched, you walked through it fully activated. Your spiritual heart works like a finely tuned radar, picking up signals that no one else registers, sensing things that remain invisible to others, feeling the atmosphere shift when you enter a room, and knowing when a soul near you is silently screaming. You tried desperately to ignore it, to shake off the unsettling intensity, but that profound sensitivity never left you. That's because it wasn't just sensitivity. It was sacred spiritual equipment. You were perfectly wired for a mission, an unseen one, a divine calling that requires you to feel far beyond the surface level of things. That's why you can't tolerate sitting still in spaces that feel fundamentally fake. That's why you feel so profoundly exhausted after forced small talk. That is why you feel irresistibly drawn to certain individuals and instantly repelled by others, even if they have done nothing to offend you. Your soul is constantly reading things that your conscious mind has no way to explain. Because you don't merely exist, you actively operate. You carry something holy, and heaven knows this truth. When the Almighty assigns a person to carry light into the darkness, He also bestows upon them a spiritual sensitivity that the majority of the world will never comprehend. You were never too much. You were, in fact, highly tuned. You were never weak. You were unequivocally sent, and that is precisely why they found you. The broken, the hidden, the ones who didn't possess the words to articulate "help me." But somehow your spirit heard them anyway. That is why they felt safe enough to instantly open up to you. That is why they spilled the secrets of their soul within the first conversation. That is why complete strangers felt comfortable telling you their deepest, most private childhood trauma without even knowing your last name. Because your simple presence carried something profoundly sacred. It didn't just listen, it actively healed. You weren't sent to deliver a lecture on morality. You were sent to restore the atmosphere around a wounded soul. And the wildest part of this whole realization is that you truly believed this was just normal. You genuinely thought everyone could feel what you felt. You thought everyone's spirit shook and reacted when they passed by a soul in pain. But no, my friend, this is your extraordinary gift. You are not just empathetic. You are a prophetic carrier. You don't merely care for others, you carry their breakthrough. You carry fire. You carry divine insight. You carry the kind of holy, quiet presence that instantly shakes chains off people without you having to utter a single word. That is why they found you. That is why you were incapable of walking away. Even when the connection hurt you, even when it cost you deeply, even when it drained your emotional and physical reserves to show up for them again and again. Because deep inside, your soul instantly recognized the assignment. You didn't stay because it was easy or convenient. You stayed because that assignment was meticulously encoded into the very fabric of your being. And here is the part that is going to fundamentally crack something open inside of your spirit. What if you have been living your entire life beneath the powerful weight of your anointing without ever consciously realizing its magnitude? What if every single emotion you labeled a flaw was actually a spiritual frequency, perfectly tuned for divine encounters? What if the very thing that made you feel intrinsically different your entire life was the clearest evidence that you were, in fact, chosen? Because once you fully begin to see it, once you realize this was never just random sensitivity, but a heavenly setup, you will finally stop apologizing for the absolute power of who you are. You will stop attempting to numb the very gift you were given, and you will begin to walk in the quiet, undeniable boldness of someone who knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were specifically assigned. And here is the most urgent part of this message. There is something else now attached to your life. Another layer of responsibility, another holy weight, another assignment that has already begun its movement directly toward you. You may not be aware of it yet,